agent have low vision or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jean, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, February 1st, 2026 issue of the front section of the New York Times on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A tech arsenal is assisting ICE in Minneapolis. There are concerns of overreach. Facial recognition tools track protesters and find immigrants, by Shira Frankel and Aaron Krolik. On the morning of January 10th, Nicole Cleland was in her car trailing an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent through Richfield, Minnesota, her hometown. Suddenly, the agent turned into a series of one-way streets and stopped, getting out of his white Dodge Ram, said Miss Cleland, who volunteers with a local watchdog group that observes the activity of immigration officers. The agent then walked over to Miss Cleland's car and surprised her by addressing her as Nicole. He said he had facial recognition and that his body camera was on, said Miss Cleland, 56, who had not met the agent before. Ms. Cleland was one of at least 7 American citizens told by ICE agents last month that they were being recorded with facial recognition technology in and around Minneapolis, according to local activists and videos posted to social media, which were verified by the New York Times. None had given consent for their faces to be recorded. Facial recognition is just one technology tool that ICE has deployed in Minneapolis, where thousands of agents are conducting a crackdown. The technologies are being used not only to identify undocumented immigrants, but also to track citizens who have protested ICE's presence, said 3 current and former officials of the Department of Homeland Security who were not authorized to discuss confidential matters. ICE is using 2 facial recognition programs in Minnesota, they said, including one made by the tech company Clearview AI and a newer program, Mobile Fortify. The agency is also using cell phone and social media tools to monitor people's online activity and potentially hack into phones. And agents are tapping into a database built by the data analytics company Palantir that combines government and commercial data to identify real-time locations for individuals they are pursuing, the current and former officials said. The technologies are being deployed, or appear to be deployed, in a much more aggressive way than we have seen in the past, said Nathan Freed Wessler, a lawyer at the American Civil Liberties Union, which has sued the Homeland Security Department over the immigration operation in Minneapolis. The conglomeration of all these technologies together is giving the government unprecedented abilities. The Homeland Security Department has not disclosed which technologies immigration agents are using in Minneapolis. A spokeswoman said the agency would not detail its methods, adding that, for years, law enforcement has leveraged technological innovation to fight crime. ICE is no different. The reach of the technologies has raised concerns. In November, Democratic senators, including Edward J. Markey of Massachusetts, Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, and Adam B. Schiff of California, asked ICE for more information on its facial recognition software and asked that it suspend use of the technology in U.S. cities. ICE has vastly expanded its tech tools over the last year after an influx of cash. In July, President Trump signed a bill increasing ICE's annual budget to roughly $28 billion from $8 billion, making it the most richly funded law enforcement agency in the federal government. In April, the Homeland Security Department awarded Palantir a nearly $30 million contract to build a system backed by artificial intelligence that would help find and track individuals for deportation. Palantir was due to deliver a prototype by September 25th, according to public tenders issued by the agency. The agency has started using the system, 2 current Homeland Security officials have said. A person familiar with Palantir said the company works with ICE on a database that integrates different information to help agents identify only non-citizens. In September, The Homeland Security Department also spent nearly $10 million acquiring at least 3 social media monitoring tools and services that allow it to delve into people's cell phones according to procurement records and public contracts for the project. One of the tools, which was built by Paragon, an Israeli technology company, lets people take control of phones or remotely hack into them to read messages or track locations. The others were built by Penlink, a Nebraska-based software company. They use social media data scraped from the web and information from data brokers to help build dossiers of anyone with a social media account. Some details of these tools were reported earlier by 404 Media. Paragon and Penlink did not respond to requests for comment. ICE's use of facial recognition software was documented in videos and photos from local activist groups in Minnesota last month and reviewed by The Times. 2 photos captured fatigue-clad agents using cell phones to scan the faces of protesters in Minneapolis, while in one video, agents could be heard telling people that they were being recorded with facial recognition technology and that their faces would be added to a database. The technology visible in the photographs was Mobile Fortify. The app was built on technology that had been created for Customs and Border Protection, the current and former Homeland Security officials said. A department spokeswoman said Mobile Fortify was a lawful law enforcement tool and lawfully used nationwide in accordance with all applicable legal authorities. In a 2024 agency report, the Homeland Security Department said it used a facial recognition tool from Clearview AI for child exploitation investigations. But a $375 million contract with the company in September, the agency said the tool would also be used to investigate attacks on law enforcement. A Clearview AI spokeswoman said the focus of its contract with the department was supporting investigations into child exploitation and cybercrimes. ICE is continuing to seek more technology. Last month, the agency published a request for information for ways to better acquire and integrate so-called big data and advertising tech into its operations, saying it was, quote, working with increasing volumes of criminal, civil, and regulatory administrative documentation from numerous internal and external sources, end quote. The questionnaire asked vendors to describe the types of data they could provide on people, businesses, devices, locations, transactions, and public records. It also asked vendors how their systems could help identify subjects, entities, or locations of interest, and whether people could be searched by identifiers, including name, phone, device, account, and location. Justin Sherman, a distinguished fellow at Georgetown Law's Center on Privacy and Technology, said the request showed ICE was doubling down on buying sensitive data. Ms. Cleland, the Richfield resident, said that 3 days after the encounter with the ICE agent, she received an email from the Department of Homeland Security saying her Global Entry and Transportation Security Administration travel privileges had been revoked. No explanation was provided. Ms. Cleland said she had swung from anger to fear. "I don't know how far-reaching ICE can be," she said. "I'm struggling to figure out what I can do without putting myself at greater risk or putting other people at risk." Last month, Ms. Cleland signed a declaration joining a lawsuit against the Homeland Security Department and U.S. District Court in Minnesota. The lawsuit challenges ICE's treatment of observers. In her declaration, Ms. Cleland asked why her traveler status had been revoked. "I am a totally average American, and I cannot abide by what is happening right now," she said. Israel launches deadly Gaza strikes as Rafah border is set to reopen. By Nathan Odenheimer and Fatima Abdullah Karim. The Israeli military launched a series of airstrikes on the Gaza Strip on Saturday, an attack that local health officials said was the deadliest in weeks, and that comes as the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas was set to move into its next phase. Zahir el-Wahadi, an official at the Gaza Health Ministry, said at least 26 people had been killed in the strikes. The Israeli military said in a statement that the airstrikes were targeting commanders from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another militant group. The military said that the strikes were in response to an incident on Friday in which militants had emerged from a tunnel in Rafah, in an Israeli-controlled area south of Gaza. The Israeli military described the incident as a violation of the ceasefire agreement. Hamas said in a statement that the bombardment in Gaza was a flagrant violation of the ceasefire agreement. The strikes came before the expected reopening of a crucial land crossing between Gaza and Egypt in the coming days, a long-delayed part of the ceasefire agreed in October. The opening of the border crossing, close to the city of Rafah, would allow Palestinians who had fled the 2-year-long war between Israel and Hamas to return home for the first time. As part of the ceasefire deal, Hamas released the remaining hostages held in Gaza in exchange for nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, while the Israeli military withdrew to an agreed-upon line inside Gaza that left it in control of about half of the enclave. On Monday, Israeli forces recovered the body of the last Israeli captive held in Gaza, setting the stage for the ceasefire to advance to its next phase. But there have been several outbreaks of violence in the Gaza since the truce came into effect, with each side accusing the other of breaching the terms of the agreement. Gaza's Ministry of Health says that Israel has killed more than 500 people in Gaza since the truce was announced. The health ministry's figures do not distinguish between civilians and combatants. Israel has said that its strikes in Gaza were in response to Hamas's violations of the ceasefire, including attacks on Israeli troops. Canada's Conservatives keep Trump-inspired party leader, by Norimitsu Onishi. Canada's main opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, a populist inspired by President Trump, has been retained as the head of the Conservative Party, despite having led it to defeat last year in an election it had once been expected to win overwhelmingly. In a speech before the vote on Friday at a party convention in Calgary, Alberta, Mr. Poilievre repeated many of the themes from his 2025 campaign, which ended in a loss to the Liberals, Prime Minister Mark Carney's party, in April. 87% of the more than 2,500 Conservatives at the convention voted to keep Mr. Poilievre as their leader, according to results released early Saturday. "You told us to ignore the voices who keep telling us to abandon our conservative principles," Mr. Poilievre said in his speech, which featured references to cancel culture and identity politics. He did not mention Mr. Trump, to whom he has often been compared. Mr. Trump is deeply unpopular in Canada, but he is supported by parts of the Conservative Party's base. Mr. Poilievre's victory at the convention had been expected. He needed only a simple majority, but a tally below 80% would have raised questions about his leadership. The result is expected to solidify his control over the party, which has been wounded by defections to the Liberals as Mr. Carney's popularity has grown. Mr. Poilievre's allies make great efforts to ensure that he won the vote convincingly, staging it in Alberta, Canada's most conservative province, and recruiting his staunchest supporters. In his speech, Mr. Poilievre said little about moving beyond the party's hardline base to win over more mainstream conservatives or other voters who, according to polls, have strong negative opinions of him. As in his unsuccessful campaign last year, Mr. Poilievre focused on issues like crime and the cost of living. His victory underscores a growing divide between the Conservatives' leadership and the mainstream voters they need to win a general election. Polls indicate that Mr. Poilievre remains an extremely unpopular nationwide, with nearly 60% of voters viewing him unfavorably. The same percentage holds a favorable opinion of Mr. Carney, according to the surveys. About a year ago, Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives had what seemed an insurmountable lead over the Liberals, who had been in power for 9 years under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Mr. Poilievre had skillfully pummeled Mr. Trudeau on issues of affordability, including the high cost of housing, while exciting his base with attacks on elitism and wokeism. He also employed tactics Mr. Trump uses, like giving his opponents demeaning nicknames. But the Conservatives suddenly dropped in the polls after Mr. Trudeau resigned and the Liberals replaced him with Mr. Carney, who had led the central banks of Canada and Britain. Mainstream voters, and even some Conservatives, said Mr. Poilievre was too much like Mr. Trump, a comparison that Mr. Poilievre was unable to shake off, and that proved crippling as Mr. Trump threatened to annex Canada and impose steep tariffs on its goods. Not only did the Conservatives lose the general election, but Mr. Poilievre lost the district he had represented for more than 2 decades. He was able to rejoin Parliament only after an incumbent in Alberta, in one of the country's staunchest Conservative districts, gave up his seat for him. According to the Conservatives' constitution, after a general election loss, a leader must face a vote at his party convention to retain his post. Mr. Poilievre has toned down his combative style lately, dropping the nicknames and his highly personal attacks on opponents. But he has hardened some of his populist positions, accusing, for example, Canada's Federal Police Service of covering up Trudeau-era scandals. His questioning of the force's integrity has raised eyebrows, including among mainstream Conservatives. Mr. Poilievre's poll numbers have continued to decline as Mr. Carney's have risen, thanks to the Prime Minister's well-received speech in Davos, Switzerland, about a post-American world order and his attempts to find new partners for Canada. 2 members of Parliament recently quit the Conservative Party to join the Liberals, a sign of the party's diverging fortunes. You are listening to a selection of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Law Against Abortion Clinic Blockades is Used to Charge Lemon by Zach Montague. Federal agents arrested the former CNN anchor Don Lemon on Thursday, claiming he and others who had entered a church in St. Paul, Minnesota last month during an anti-ICE protest had violated a federal law prohibiting the obstruction of abortion clinics and places of worship. Joining a small group of activists who had streamed into the church to denounce an immigration and customs enforcement official who serves as a pastor of the church, Mr. Lemon has maintained that he was present in his capacity as a journalist to document the confrontation. Mr. Lemon was indicted by a federal grand jury. His arrest came after a federal magistrate judge concluded that there was insufficient evidence that Mr. Lemon had violated the law. His arrest raised profound concerns about press freedom and First Amendment activity, but it also demonstrated the ways the Trump administration has repurposed a 1994 law which was previously used more often to shield women's health clinics from disruptive blockades. What is the FACE Act? The Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act of 1994 is a law signed by former President Bill Clinton that makes it a federal crime to physically obstruct entry to clinics offering reproductive health services. The law was drafted as a response by Congress to a Supreme Court decision in 1993, which held that women seeking abortions were not a protected class that could be shielded from confrontational protest activity under existing federal statutes. The court had ruled 6-3 that an 1871 law banning threatening vigilantism by the Ku Klux Klan against black residents could not be extended to prohibit disruptive demonstrations at abortion clinics. The FACE Act addressed the legislative gap by specifically protecting access to reproductive health services. At the same time, it included a provision extending similar protections to people seeking to enter a house of worship to exercise the First Amendment right of religious freedom. By design, the law has typically been used to charge individuals whose conduct veered into intimidation or interfering generally with medical practitioners or people seeking treatment. Nonviolent and first-time offenses are usually charged as misdemeanors, according to the law, but more serious cases involving bodily injury can be charged as a felony with a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. How has the FACE Act been used previously? Under President Joseph R. Biden, Jr., a number of demonstrators were found guilty of violating the law while picketing or obstructing the entrance to reproductive health centers. In 2024, Lauren Handy, a prominent anti-abortion activist, was sentenced to 57 months in prison for her role in a blockade of a center in Washington, D.C., which involved making a false patient appointment to enter the clinic. In another case that year, Bevelyn Beatty Williams was sentenced to 41 months after a series of incidents in Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, and New York, in which she tried to prevent patients and medical staff members from entering various clinics. Ms. Handy was pardoned by President Trump in 2025 on his fourth day in office, just days before the annual anti-abortion March for Life rally. Last year, the Justice Department used the FACE Act after heated demonstrations at an event in a synagogue in West Orange, New Jersey. Pro-Palestinian protesters outside the synagogue had clashed with pro-Israeli counter-protesters, resulting in violent exchanges and the arrest of 2 pro-Israel demonstrators who were charged with aggravated assault. The Justice Department charged members of the pro-Palestinian groups with violations of the FACE Act, moving to bar them from protesting outside houses of worship and seeking to fine them tens of thousands of dollars. Those who target houses of worship and violate our federal laws protecting people of faith are on notice that they will face the consequences. Harmeet K. Dillon, the head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, said at the time. The Trump administration has simultaneously substantially scaled back its use of the law in cases involving health clinics. A Justice Department memo sent out last year advised that future abortion-related FACE Act prosecutions and civil actions will be permitted only in extraordinary circumstances. And federal prosecutors under Mr. Trump moved last year to drop pending cases involving blockades of clinics from before the president's second term. First Amendment overlap. Since its inception, the FACE Act has run into challenges from anti-abortion activists who argued it infringed on their freedom of speech and right to lawfully assemble. Throughout the 1990s, the law withstood a number of legal challenges. At least 4 federal appeals courts have upheld FACE's constitutionality. The Supreme Court has not heard a direct challenge to the FACE Act, but it has declined to take up certain cases involving parallel issues. Last year, the Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal opposing protest buffer zones around abortion clinics, leaving in place some restrictions on how close to an entrance demonstrators could stand. A vastly different use. Republican lawmakers and conservative and religious groups have pushed for several years to defang or even repeal the FACE Act because of its use against people protesting abortion on religious grounds. At the same time, others have called for a beefed-up use of the law in cases involving places of worship, with Republicans in Congress petitioning the Justice Department under Mr. Biden to place a heavier emphasis on protests outside churches. What was Don Lemon charged with? Mr. Lemon and 8 others were charged with 1 count of violating the FACE Act on Friday. They were also charged with conspiring to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person exercising their freedom of religion. In the indictment, the Justice Department claimed that the demonstrators in the group had poured into the church, shouting at both the pastor and the congregants, including children, calling them Nazis and referring to the church as the house of the devil. The indictment claimed that Mr. Lemon refused to leave after being asked to exit the church by the pastor, and that the demonstrators blocked the pastor in while Mr. Lemon peppered him with questions. Guilty pleasure or necessity? Delivery apps reshape dining, by Priya Krishna. There's pasta in the pantry and jarred sauce in the refrigerator. So what compels Keely Reedy to keep having spaghetti with marinara delivered from the restaurant down the street for several times the cost of cooking the dish herself? It's not that the restaurant dish is particularly good, she said. It's the instant gratification. From her roughly $50,000 a year annual salary as a data processor in San Diego, Ms. Reedy, 34, spends at least $200 to $300 a week on food delivery. Ordering in has eaten away at her savings, she said, and led her to socialize less. She tips generously, but worries that the delivery drivers are poorly paid. I feel reliant upon it, she said, but guilt for using it. Food delivery, which skyrocketed during the pandemic as a practical necessity, has become even more entrenched in the years since as a convenience, an everyday alternative to cooking or eating out. DoorDash is now a verb, and the new delivery economy is transforming the way Americans live, reshaping budgets, meal times, and social habits. In 2024, almost 3 of every 4 restaurant orders were not eaten in a restaurant, according to the data from the National Restaurant Association. The number of households using delivery had roughly doubled from 2019, just before the pandemic, the group said. And in a survey last year, about 1/3 of American adults told the association that they ordered food for delivery at least once a week. We asked New York Times readers to share their feelings about food delivery. Most of the nearly 900 who responded said they prized the extra time and freedom it gives them, but expressed misgivings about the cost for delivery drivers, the environment, and their own wallets at a time when affordable living feels increasingly out of reach. Many readers said they impulsively ordered a single item for delivery: a coffee, a milkshake, a scoop of ice cream. Aaron Molnar, a marketer in Ferndale, Michigan, once paid about $15 for a tiny chocolate lava cake. I remember feeling kind of crazy for having one single thing delivered, she said, adding, "It's a blessing and a curse, and we are not financially privileged. There is not much of a financial pressure to not order out as much." Millions of Americans, of course, are struggling to put any kind of food on the table as grocery prices continue to rise. And for people who can't leave the home, food delivery is essential. The 3 major providers, DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Grubhub, said in email responses that they're proud of the extra time and continued choices that they offer busy customers. "You can find almost anything available for on-demand delivery," said Uber Eats spokesman wrote. That message has a special resonance for the working parents we heard from. Between raising 2 young boys and putting in long hours at a marketing job in Atlanta, Kevin Caldwell can almost never find time to make dinner. So he and his husband spend about $700 a week to order in. "I'm so burned out and tired, I would rather just throw my credit card at the problem and delay that unhappiness until the bill comes," he said. His 4-year-old son doesn't read yet, but he can put together an order on Chick-fil-A app, said Mr. Caldwell, 39. "I am impressed, but I'm also terrified." He frets about the waste he's creating with delivery boxes and bags. He's frustrated by the rising cost of ordering in, even though he'll often opt to pay extra to get faster service. And he misses entertaining guests as often as he once did. His formal dining table, he said, is collecting dust. "I don't go out anymore." Missy Ogg, who recently moved home to Santa Fe from Los Angeles to work as a sommelier, has most of her food delivered. She no longer feels the social pressure she once did to meet friends for dinner. "I still have friends here, but I don't go out anymore," she said. "So I randomly see people and they're like, 'I didn't know you were back.'" Others said food delivery has actually made them more social. Nia Kowal, an events director in Yardley, PA, began ordering meals when her 2 adult children lived with her and her husband during the pandemic. But she has continued as an empty nester because it allows her to spend more time with friends. "It has been a big forgiving act for myself," said Ms. Kowal, 54, who commutes an hour each way to New York City for work there 3 days a week. "I would rather sit and catch up with a friend over a drink than worry about what we are going to have for dinner that night." She recently invited friends over and said, "We DoorDash dinner." "I would never want my mother to know how much we DoorDash," she said. "She would be horrified." Many Generation Zers who came of age during the pandemic can barely recall a life without delivery, and their social lives now revolve around it. Mercury Lamb, a Yale sophomore, said there's almost always a delivery driver outside her dorm, even though undergraduates living on campus are required to pay for a meal plan. She and her friends spend many evenings ordering food to share, which she says costs less than going out and takes up less time. To keep in touch, she and her long-distance boyfriend order the same meal and eat it together over FaceTime. While Ms. Lamb, 19, has concerns about the pollution caused by the driving involved, she said delivery has expanded her palate. The first time she tasted Indian food was when a friend ordered it, and because delivery apps offer more detailed descriptions than restaurant menus do, she's more likely to try something new. Helena Kim, a stay-at-home mother in Chula Vista, California, decided that when she turned 59, she no longer wanted to cook. I was getting groceries delivered anyway, she said, so if I'm going to order groceries, I may as well order the whole meal. She tips well and gives drivers high ratings. Ms. Kim, now 60, adores her automated life. I get Amazon delivery, I get food delivery, I get grocery delivery, I get pet food delivery, she said. When she does leave the house, I drive a Tesla and I use self-driving mode. If I could get a robot housekeeper, that would be perfect. Still, such an on-demand lifestyle can keep consumers from developing critical skills like problem solving, planning ahead, or making tough decisions, said Hu Du, a research and insight manager at market research firm Datassential. That's why so many young people are choosing to make financial and food-based decisions in a moment that feels good now, said Mr. Du, even though it can prevent them from making long-term financial investments. Less time cooking. Ordering meals online has also disconnected people from food and its preparation, said Yash Babar, a professor at the Wisconsin School of Business. Last year, he published a report showing that when food delivery platforms entered countries across the United States, residents spent an average of 9% less time cooking each day than they did before. That disconnect extends to restaurants, many of which have accepted a trade-off. Delivery helped keep them afloat during the pandemic and expanded their customer base, but they now have fewer in-house diners. Some of the people most affected by this disengagement are the ones delivering the meals, whose interactions with customers are limited because drivers are commonly instructed to leave food at the door. Even though these drivers don't often see their customers, they notice plenty. It seems like everyone uses these delivery services whether they have the money or not, said Mitch Drabenstadt, 32, a driver in Allentown, PA. Steph Basil, a writer in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, who drives for DoorDash, said she's often surprised by which customers are more welcoming. When you go to subsidized housing, the tips are better and the people are nicer, said Ms. Basil, 42. When you go to the more expensive houses, there will be like a whole lot of instructions, like, don't park on my driveway. She keeps doing drop-offs because it allows her to feed 5 children. The money she and her husband make from day jobs isn't enough to cover routine expenses. Austin Lane, 31, who drives for Uber Eats in Los Angeles, said he needs the extra income to supplement his salary as a data analyst. He said he's usually paid $2 to $4 per delivery, no matter how far he has to drive. Tips, if he gets them, are no more than a few dollars per order. Like many drivers, he grumbles about the pay. The job can feel dehumanizing, he said, particularly when he sees delivery robots doing the work. It certainly feel like I'm one of those and not an actual person who has to go to a restaurant, pick up the food, and drive it to your house, he said. But he keeps delivering because he likes the flexible hours. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Last week's top trending headlines. Ilhan Omar is attacked during a Minneapolis town hall on immigration crackdown. The man who squirted the strong-smelling liquid from a syringe into Representative Ilhan Omar at the town hall event in Minneapolis on Tuesday had for years posted online about his anger at Democrats. The man, Anthony J. Kaczmarek, 55, was charged with assault by federal prosecutors on Thursday. Shooting aftermath leaves Homeland Security Department in turmoil. The, quote, blame game over the Trump administration's handling of the Alex Preddy killing by federal agents in Minneapolis has left the Homeland Security Department, an agency tasked with protecting the country from threats at home and abroad, in what officials say is a severe crisis. An American Street. For the In One Image series, David Gutenfielder and Thomas Gibbons Neff analyzed a photo of violence on Nicollet Avenue in Minneapolis in the wake of Mr. Preddy's death. The picture showed a protester who had been tackled to the street by federal agents wielding grenade launchers, handguns, and stun guns. Philip Glass withdraws from Kennedy Center as its symphony vows to play on. On Tuesday, the composer Philip Glass told the Kennedy Center that he did not want his symphony, based on Abraham Lincoln's 1838 Lyceum address, performed on its stage. The values of the Kennedy Center today are in direct conflict with the symphony's message, he wrote in a letter. The withdrawal by Glass, 89, is the latest blow for the center amid President Trump's efforts to remake it in his name. Tehran says a number of those arrested in its crackdown are under 18, by Pravna Bhaskar and Lily Nuzga Nazar. Iran has said for the first time that children were among those arrested in a crackdown on nationwide protests in recent weeks. A number of students under 18 were arrested during the protests, the deputy chairman of Iran's Parliamentary Education Commission, Farshad Ibrahimpour, told the semi-official Iranian labor news agency on Friday. He did not specify how many were detained, nor how long they would remain in custody. Rights groups monitoring unrest in Iran say at least 300 children, adolescents, and students were detained. The protests, which were ignited by economic woes in December and grew into a broader anti-regime movement, appear to have been largely crushed, including with deadly force. Now the government is shifting efforts to persecuting protesters by carrying out new arrests and bolstering its security presence in schools. It has been difficult to ascertain exactly what happened during the protests, in large part because the government shut down the internet and restricted communications. In recent days, in sporadic bursts of connection, some details have begun emerging. The country's National Security Council offered an official death toll of 3,117. That figure was lower than the latest count from the U.S.-based human rights activist news agency, which has so far verified 6,479 deaths, including those of 118 children. The verification process is continuing, and the death toll is likely to rise. Students, particularly at universities, have long been at the forefront of struggles for democratic change in Iran, including in the revolution that toppled the monarchy and birthed the Islamic Republic in 1979. In turn, the Iranian government has raided campuses, arrested students, and, at times, banned them from higher education altogether. An Iranian teachers' union, which has been monitoring the children affected in the government's crackdown, condemned what it described as the killing of students and teachers and the securitization of education. The group called for an immediate release of those in custody. Some children, the union says, have not been heard of since their arrest. In dozens of accounts shared on Telegram channel, the union has published photographs and descriptions of children reported to be arrested or killed. The New York Times could not independently verify those reports. Asal, a 20-year-old who participated in the protests in Kharja, said she witnessed many teenagers around 15 or 16 being beaten up and shot in the streets. She spoke on the condition of anonymity out of fear of reprisal. We were trapped on a street when suddenly a teenage girl, maybe 17 or 18, tapped me on the shoulder and shouted, "Hey, there's a green laser beam on your body. They're targeting you," Asal said in a voice message. Moments later, that girl was shot. I don't know where she was hit, but she collapsed to the ground covered in blood. President Trump had threatened military action against Iran and urged on the protesters. He has called for new leadership in the country and said that the massive armada was heading towards the country and that the U.S. was prepared to strike with speed and violence. Iran has vowed to retaliate using against any American assaults And on Friday, its foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, said it would not negotiate with the United States unless Mr. Trump stops threatening it. Drilling through Antarctic Glacier to examine melting ice from its depths, by Raymond Zong. Antarctica, to peer into the future of one of Antarctica's largest and fastest shrinking glaciers, scientists on Wednesday began piercing a deep hole through its icy core. A team of British and South Korean researchers is preparing to use the hole to study the warm ocean currents that are melting the Thwaites Glacier from below. Scientists fear that as Thwaites' floating ice erodes and weakens, the rest of the glacier could start sliding quickly from the land to the ocean, adding to global sea rise level. But Thwaites' floating end is too large for ocean-going robots to explore the deepest reaches of the waters underneath it. So the best way for researchers to collect data in those waters is by using hot water to bore a narrow hole through the half-mile thick ice and installing instruments at the bottom. "We're just kind of curious to see more of what's beneath our feet," said Keith Makeson, an oceanographer and drilling engineer with the British Antarctic Survey. The hot water first hit the ice on Wednesday evening after a dinner of stir-fried spaghetti with peanuts and tuna. After camping for more than a week on Thwaites to set up the drilling equipment, the food choice is diminishing, said Peter Davis, another oceanographer on the team. Several members of the 10-person team worked through the night to operate the drilling system, which includes a battery of hoses, winches, pumps, heats, water tanks, and gasoline-powered generators, all of which set up in a vast snowy expanse on Thwaites' main trunk. The system heats water to 80 degrees Celsius or 176 degrees Fahrenheit and shoots it through a drilling hose with a spray nozzle at the end. The hose can punch through a meter or more than 3 feet of ice per minute near the surface, though the rate slows deeper inside the glacier because the hot water cools on its way down through the hose. The researchers first bored 2 holes not far from each other, each one about 375 feet deep. They then connected the holes at the bottom with a bulbous cavity to hold a supply of water for the drilling system. As the hose continued boring down one of these holes, the resulting meltwater could gather in the cavity. From there, it would be pumped up to the surface through a second hole, heated and reused for the drilling hose. After carving out the cavity on Thursday, the researchers weren't sure the water recycling system was properly connected inside it, so they lowered a camera to take a look. Once they had pulled the camera back up, the team members huddled around a laptop to examine the footage from inside the borehole, an experience that Wan Sang Lee, the expedition's chief scientist, compared to watching an endoscopy. At first, the foot-wide hole looked just like a hole, with white walls that had been left glistening and pockmarked by the rapid melting. Then, starting at around 50 feet beneath the surface, huge chunks of ice seemed to be missing from the sides. They were gaping crevasses, and they seemed to twist and extend deep into the glacier like a Yeti's cave. Later, these crevasses might prove dangerous for the scientists' instruments, which could become hooked or trapped while being lowered into the hole. But the fact that the ice was crevassed came as no great shock. It's because this part of Thwaites is moving so rapidly, stretching and splitting apart in the process, that the research team wants to know what's going on in the water underneath. "I'd be surprised if we drilled down and there wasn't any crevassing," Dr. Makeson said. By Thursday evening, the scientists had confirmed that the water recycling system was functioning, and they started the day-long process of deepening the main borehole down to the watery realm about which so much is still unknown. Russian oil revenue falls, adding to the burden of war, by Ivan Nechepurenko. As Russia holds direct peace talks with Ukraine for the first time in months, the Kremlin's most potent fuel for the war, oil revenue, is under mounting strain. The price of Russian oil, the country's primary export, has declined under the weight of surging global supplies and Western sanctions related to the war. Last year, Russia's oil and gas revenue fell by almost a quarter, according to the finance ministry. The Kremlin is resorting to tax increases and deficit spending to bridge the gap. So far, there is little sign that the economic strains and any disconnect they generate among the business leaders and the public will be enough to change President Vladimir V. Putin's calculations on the war. Trilateral negotiations involving Russia, Ukraine, and the United States are set to continue on Sunday in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the United Arab Emirates. But with the economy stagnating and the Kremlin reaching the limit of what it can squeeze from it, the Russian people will have to bear more of the burden of a war whose costs exceed about $170 billion a year. This situation is manageable, said Yevgeny Nadorshin, an economist in Moscow who advises companies and banks. But no one is comfortable with that. Throughout his decades-long rule, Mr. Putin has taken pride in the stability he's brought to the Russian economy that was in free fall after the demise of the Soviet Union, slashing debt, streamlining taxes, and taming inflation. A strong oil economy allowed the Russian state to deliver an improved standard of living. That, the Kremlin hoped, would keep the public content even as the government eroded personal freedoms. Now the carefully cultivated economic stability is fracturing. The steep drop in oil revenue has sent Russia into a new era defined by sustained budget deficits, higher taxes, and stubborn inflation. Russia's oil trade has been battered by two forces. Oil prices have declined since April, after the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries decided to gradually increase production after years of cuts. The Russian oil industry has also been hit in recent months by new Western sanctions and the heavier enforcement of the existing ones. In October, President Trump imposed sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft, which is state-owned, and Lukoil, which is private. Those penalties significantly undercut the company's ability to sell crude. Since then, Russia has also faced stepped-up enforcement of restrictions against the illicit shadow fleet of tankers it uses to ship oil. Last month, the U.S. military seized a Russian-flagged vessel in the North Atlantic that had been used to carry Venezuelan oil. The French Navy also intercepted a tanker in the Mediterranean suspected of using a false flag and belonging to Russia-linked fleet. Because of the current global oversupply, buyers now have more alternatives to Russian crude. This allows them to either walk away entirely or demand significantly higher discounts to compensate for the risk of handling goods hit with sanctions, said Sergei Valilenko, an energy expert at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Had it not been for this noticeable decrease in oil prices, he said, all these measures would have been far less effective. Discounts on Russian oil have grown drastically. The Economy Ministry said the average price of Russian oil was $39 per barrel in December, down from more than $57 in August. Adding to Moscow's problems, Ukraine has been using drones since November to strike Russia-linked tankers in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The Ukrainian military has also been attacking Russian refineries. That has contributed to fuel crises in several regions, forcing the government to temporarily ban the export of oil products. The only factor that can change the situation is economic pressure in Russia, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine said on Friday. Russia must run out of money for the war to start it coming to an end. This is not the first time that Mr. Putin has dealt with a drop in oil prices. But in previous years, the Russian state had more options. It could cut expenditures or allow the currency to weaken to replenish the budget. But the costs of the war, which amount to about 30% of Russia's $580 billion annual budget, make it hard to reduce expenses. And the currency, the ruble, has remained strong. Propped up by restrictions on imports and high interest rates, the ruble surged by about 45% against the U.S. dollar in 2025. A strong ruble means that the government receives less money for each barrel of crude that is sold. With options dwindling, the Kremlin had little choice but to increase state debt as well as personal and corporate taxes. The Russian government also increased taxes on smaller enterprises like bakeries and shops, causing a rare uproar among owners. Russia's budget deficit reached $72 billion in 2025, nominally the highest since 2009. Mr. Nadorshin, the economist, said he expected it to increase further this year. The situation is becoming more complicated, he said, and it is clear that the pace of this complication is, naturally, worrying. Trump's suit against IRS creates enormous conflict of interest, by Andrew Duran. Federal law fiercely protects the confidentiality of Americans' tax returns. Not only can improper disclosure of tax information carry criminal penalties, but people also can sue the government if the Internal Revenue Service mishandles their data. Not until Thursday, though, had a sitting president filed successfully a suit. President Trump complaint filed in federal court in Miami against the IRS and the Treasury Department created what legal experts said was the unparalleled situation of federal agencies facing a lawsuit from the head of the executive branch. Mr. Trump has demanded at least $10 billion in damages. It's an enormous conflict of interest, said Richard Painter, the chief White House ethics lawyer in the George W. Bush administration. His own appointees could turn around and say, "Let's give the Trump family a couple of billion. That's a fair sale." Mr. Trump's suit accuses the IRS and the Treasury of not doing enough to prevent the leak of his tax returns by Charles Littlejohn, a former IRS contractor who admitted to giving Mr. Trump's tax returns to the New York Times. Mr. Littlejohn was sentenced to 5 years in prison for leaking Mr. Trump's returns, as well as tax information about ultra-wealthy Americans that Mr. Littlejohn separately provided to ProPublica. Mr. Trump, who brought the suit along with 2 of his sons and his family business, is not without merit, legal experts said. But its success would hinge on the genuine legal questions that the Justice Department, which would represent the IRS, may or may not contest in court. It's not a crazy lawsuit, said Michael Eric Herz, a professor at Cardozo Law School. It should be taken seriously, and if it was anyone other than the president bringing the lawsuit, you would say, I can understand this. The Treasury and the IRS did not respond to requests for comment about how they would respond to the suit. The Justice Department and the White House declined to comment. The first question is whether the IRS could be held liable for the conduct of Mr. Littlejohn, a contractor who worked for the Bose Allen and not the IRS. The billionaire Ken Griffith previously sued the IRS over Mr. Littlejohn's leak of his tax return to ProPublica, and in that case, the agency argued that it was not responsible for Mr. Littlejohn's actions. Mr. Griffith and the IRS settled the case, and the agency apologized for the leak. Another question is whether Mr. Trump has brought his lawsuit quickly enough. Under federal law, people have 2 years to sue the government after they discover that their tax returns have been improperly disclosed. While Mr. Littlejohn pleaded guilty in October of 2023, Mr. Trump's complaint said that he did not know that his tax return information had been leaked from the IRS until he received a notice about it from the agency on January 29, 2024, exactly 2 years before he filed the suit. There's quite a bit of litigation and press coverage concerning the nature of the disclosure that Littlejohn engaged in, said Leslie Book, a law professor at Villanova. To argue, as Trump is arguing in the suit, that he wasn't aware of this and he didn't discover it until the IRS sent that letter, frankly, I find that hard to support. Given those issues, Francesca Ugliini, a former lawyer at the Justice Department Tax Division, said that in a vacuum, she would expect the government would try and have Mr. Trump's suit dismissed, but she is not sure the Justice Department would want to vigorously contest the president's claims, and appointees may seek to settle. It's hard to imagine that they wouldn't feel that pressure even if it wasn't explicit, she said. Congress could try and limit the Justice Department's ability to pay a settlement to Mr. Trump, she said, but otherwise there's not really another check. Mr. Trump has previously sought to extract payments from the Justice Department, demanding the department pay him about $230 million in compensation for the federal inquiries into him. The department has also been responsive to Mr. Trump's call for the government to prosecute people he perceives as his political enemies. How the IRS protects taxpayer information is closely scrutinized. Republicans pointed to the leak of Mr. Trump's and other wealthy Americans' tax information as evidence that the agency was biased against conservatives. Hunter Biden accused the IRS of improperly leasing his tax information, suing the agency while his father was president. Mr. Biden later dropped that case. The Trump administration has sought to use protected taxpayer records at the IRS to help with immigration enforcement. The IRS and Immigration and Customs Enforcement shared a deal last year to share taxpayer information. Through a judge later blocked the agencies from doing that. How Trump took up Christian genocide in Nigeria. Top advisors from the Trump administration sat at the head of a giant wooden table in an office near the White House in late October, listening as religious activists described attacks on Christian churches and pastors in Nigeria. The activists wanted President Trump to do something about it. 3 days later, the president threatened to enter Nigeria guns a-blazing to avenge what he has called a Christian genocide. Then on Christmas Day, Mr. Trump launched Tomahawk missiles at terrorist scum he said were responsible for killing Nigerian Christians. The strike was the explosive outcome of an intense, years-long push by Christian activists, Republican lawmakers, and American celebrities seeking U.S. intervention in a long-simmering security crisis in Nigeria. Thousands are killed annually in Nigeria, and the victims include large numbers of both Christians and Muslims. The violence involves battles over land, kidnappings for ransom, sectarian tensions, and terrorism, but the activists wanted Mr. Trump to see the conflict through a single lens: the persecution of Christians. Now the activists have seized on his support to orchestrate a rapid shift in American foreign policy towards Nigeria, with major consequences for the West African nation, including the threat of more bombings. Our challenge, said Nia Shea, an activist and the former commissioner for the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, was to break through the narratives that this was not religiously based. In Davos, Switzerland, on January 22nd, Mr. Trump praised the December strikes. In Nigeria, we're annihilating terrorists who are killing Christians, he said. We've hit them very hard. A congressional spending measure released last month would condition half of U.S. aid to Nigeria on whether the country has done enough to stop the violence, advance religious freedom, and investigate jihadi terrorist groups. Mr. Trump told the New York Times recently that he would approve more strikes if Christians continued to be killed, and senior U.S. leaders were in Nigeria's capital to announce a new, closer military partnership between the two nations. For the Christian activists, Mr. Trump's support has been the rightful outcome of a mission one key U.S. congressman described as a calling from God. For the Nigerian government, correcting the record on who bears the brunt of the violence has become less important than making concessions to Mr. Trump. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, February 1st, 2026 issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Jean, and thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,